Welcome to Biology of Marine Mammals. I'm Dr. Leslie Williams, and this lecture is all about introducing you to the concepts of DNA and genetics. So we're going to start by taking a look at what DNA is and how is it organized or used in a cell. And from there, we'll talk about two terms that are sometimes used as synonyms, but erroneously. Those are the concepts of genes versus the concept of alleles. And finally, we'll take a look at what is genetic variation and why does it matter. So let's go ahead and get started with DNA. This is a picture, a molecular model of DNA. In many art museums or sculptures, you'll see this, what's called a double helix. It actually is two strands, so you can almost picture like a ladder that has been twisted around, held stable at its base and then twisted around at the top to create almost a spiraling pattern that is sometimes called the double helix. So this molecular model does not give away exactly what DNA really is or how it works. So that's what we're going to do today. Even though this is what it looks like, it doesn't really tell us what it does. So in order to understand what DNA actually does, we need to first unravel it. So in your mind, I want you to imagine taking this picture here and going ahead and actually unwrapping it in the same way that you might unwrap a ladder that's been twisted. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take both sides of the ladder and actually separate them from each other. And what I want you to do is imagine that you're now turning that one half of a ladder towards you and actually reading the rungs on the ladder. And what we're going to see is that in DNA, those rungs are actually code. But the code is not like a computer code, which is built around a series of zeros and ones, but rather a genetic code, which is built around 4 different letters, and we call them A, G, T, and C. Okay, so those A, G, T's, and C's collectively make up the architectural blueprint for an individual's body plan. So in other words, when you look at yourself, much of your body plan is encrypted in your DNA. Your DNA makes the blueprint for you. One particular region of instructional code gets the term gene. So in this sense, let's take a look at hair color, for example. Everybody has a hair color. Mine is rather different, but everybody has one. And so when you take a look at the instructional code for hair color, we would say there's a gene for hair color. And everybody has a gene for hair color. Now, like I said, that gene is written in a series of A's, G's, T's, and C's. And what really matters isn't whether or not you have A's, G's, T's, and C's, but what specific order those letters are written in. So for example, if my gene for hair color was written as A, G, G, T, T, and yours was written as A, G, A, T, C, they'd be a little bit different. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at unwrapping the DNA, let's take a look at where DNA is in a code and what it looks like. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to take a look at where is DNA in a cell. And many of you have probably heard the term chromosomes. In fact, the picture shown here represents a generic chromosome, which is very often shown as a double X here. So we see these two little parts that kind of come together and form this little X that we sometimes see. Okay, where's the DNA in this? The DNA is actually one very, very, very long strand that has been tightly wound up into something that's condensed, and in this case looks in this X shape as a chromosome. So the chromosome is the X. It is made up of a very, 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 very long strand of code, or DNA. So you have to picture in this case, if you were going to make a chromosome life-size, that it was really this small ladder that stretched all the way to the sky, had wrapped around that ladder, and then someone took that ladder and literally tried to basically wrap it around in the same way you'd wrap a garden hose up. So they just wrap it around and wrap it around and wrap it around until the ladder shrinks, 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 and you have this condensed chromosome. Okay, all of the DNA in the cell is found in these chromosomes. And so each cell has a specific number of chromosomes. And as it turns out, each species has a specific number of chromosomes. So in every one of your cells, you have 46 chromosomes. But that number isn't consistent across species. So for example, many seals only have 32 chromosomes in their cells, and dolphins have 44. So again, you have 46, dolphins have 44, and seals have 32. Okay, so when we take a look at one chromosome, of which you have many, and you unravel it and you start reading the code, remember one instructional code is going to be a gene. So because we have such a very, very long ladder, we can fit many, many, many genes on there. And so chromosomes contain anywhere between tens of genes to thousands of genes per chromosome. So the average human has around 25,000 genes in a single cell, all distributed among 46 chromosomes. Which brings up this very interesting paradox. If individuals have the same genes, then why do we look different? And that's pretty much true. Most individuals of the same species have the same collection of genes. But if you look at one human to another, and I've made the statement that genes code for your body plan, then you look and you say, well, I look different than the person next to me. So how can that be if we have the same genes? And here is where the devil is in the details. It is true, you have the same genes as the person next to you, but that doesn't mean that you have the same version of that gene. So you have a gene for hair color, the person next to you has a gene for hair color, but it doesn't mean that you make the same hair color. Okay, so here's where the term alleles comes into play. I'm actually going to switch for a moment and talk about pea plants because it's a rather simplistic example that highlights the idea of alleles versus genes. So if you've ever planted peas before and you've grown them up, before they actually produce the peas that you want to eat, they first make a flower. Those flowers might come in a couple different colors. So what we say is, yes, all pea plants have the ability to produce a flower, and therefore they all have a flower color. But they don't all make the same color. So that color can be purple or it can be white. And we say that we have a purple allele or a white allele, even though they all have one gene for that particular color. So again, everybody has the same genes, but they may not have the same alleles. We all have a gene for hair color. We may not all have the same alleles for hair color. So in my case, I have brown or blue, and someone else might have blonde, someone else might have red. So those are going to be different alleles for that particular gene. Now, as I mentioned, a gene is going to be located on a chromosome. So we make what's called a chromosome map, as shown here, where we have the chromosome and we have a specific location for that gene on the chromosome. Now again, in the pea plants, each pea plant will have a gene for flower color, but they may not have the same allele. So here we show that we have two different alleles on this chromosome. One allele codes for a purple pigment, and the other allele is going to code for a white pigment. So therefore, the one that carries a purple allele will make a purple flower, and the one that carries the white allele will make a white flower. So going back to our question, all individuals of the same species are going to look different because they have distinct alleles. In other words, individuals do not have the same collection of alleles even though they have the same collection of genes. So when we talk about this term called genetic variability, we are really looking at differences in alleles, not necessarily different collections of genes. Okay. We're going to get into the concept of genetic variation. Genetic variation is the idea that your genetics between individuals in the same population are different. So when we talk about the variation within a population, again, we're looking at the alleles. The ultimate cause of that genetic variation is going to be found at the DNA code level. Now remember, I said DNA code is built in a series of A's, G's, T's, and C's. So I want you to imagine for a moment that we have a particular gene with a code AAGGTTCC, and that's the specific sequence. If I change out one of those codes, one of those letters for a different one, as shown here in this picture, so AAGGTTCC went to AAGATTCC, then I'm probably going to get a different outcome or a different allele. These DNA changes are called mutations, and they accidentally show up during the formation of egg or sperm. So when you get these mutations and you get a change in the DNA sequence, the new individual that is formed by the egg and the sperm coming together and forming a new organism are going to carry a slightly different DNA sequence. And of course, these mutations then produce new alleles. That is how we might have gotten from a pea plant population that produced all purple flowers to maybe a few that actually produced white flowers. So when we talk about different alleles, we're really talking about slightly different DNA sequences. Okay. The more alleles in a population, the more genetic variation within a population. And as we're going to see in a different lecture, genetic variation is a good thing. The more genetic variation you have in a population, the more options you have to pick from to make unique individuals. And with that, thank you, and I'll see you next time.